Okay, David Bates,
And what year were you born?
1937.
How long did you live in Dundas for?
Lived in Dundas until 1959.
And what made you leave?
Well, I had finished university, so I was moving to Toronto for work.
What did you go to university for?
Oh, it was in science programs, mostly biology, chemistry.
What's your earliest childhood memory?
Yes. Well, I don't know it's the earliest, but certainly the walks to public school, walking up King Street and through a little alley behind Pinder's there, Pinder's Variety, and then over to Albert Street and up to the school. I mean, I remember doing that many times. Well, we also had, and I don't know whether it's the earliest, but nevertheless, crawling in snowbanks in front of the house. That I also, so this would be among early ones. Blackout curtains during the war when the sirens went, and pulling the curtains down in the front of the house, putting old tin cans and so on in a big container at Memorial Square there for metals for war effort. So they would be in the early years anyhow, yes. Those would be some. I might think of others. Yeah, yeah.
So who took care of you growing up?
Well, both my parents did, but I would say, usually your mother and some help that she had. The secretary, nurse assistant in my dad's office sometimes, and mother had, she had other help with me. I was a bit sick at the beginning, so.
How did your parents meet?
They both were at McGill in Montreal. My dad was there in medicine, and my mother in arts, and she became a teacher for a little while. But they met. My dad was from just up on the mountain above Hamilton, up in Glanford Township, but she was from Montreal West, so they met at McGill.
Can you tell me a little bit about your dad? Just because I know he's the doctor. I only know so much, so I know he's the doctor from the doctor's office, or one of the men.
That's right. He was the doctor there, and one of, I think it was 5 maybe in Dundas at the time. So the office was on King Street, right across from Memorial Square, and we lived right next. There was a little driveway, and we lived just beside the office there. So I remember. Well, certainly we remember people coming to the office for usual checkups. He was some there, and also emergencies that he had that needed a doctor. Doctors at that time went to accidents. So I remember many times he'd go up to Peter's Corners or Rakeman's Corners or somewhere for traffic accidents. And the funeral home, Cattell's, had the ambulance. So that was a bit before the present day arrangements, but doctors at that time, because it was a small rural, in a sense, rural communities, at least agricultural center, and a lot of his patients were out in the country, but so were sparse anyway, so I remember that. Also at the time, well, the office doesn't have it here, but there had been an addition to the office at the back of the office, and doctors at that time prescribed medication, so he had a dispensary at the back, and I can remember, well, both for ourselves going there for little headache pills or something, but just watching him fill out medications and that kind of thing. So that doesn't happen now either, you know. And well, so he was quite generous in both in the community but with his patients, and so he was out many times in the middle of the night, or going to accidents, or and so on. Yeah. Probably much more, but maybe it'll come out as we talk. Yes.
How did he get to the accident? So did he have I assume he had a car?
Just a car. Yeah, he would buy a new car, usually about every 2 years, from Newton's garage down the street, and so it was his own car. Nothing special, no sirens, no nothing, just go to an accident or go to somebody's place. So that was also a period. Now, he had the office and regular hours, but also, well, the mornings were usually hospital visits and patients, so doctors regularly visited their patients at home as well as in the office. So he usually did hospital visits to patients in the morning, and office hours at the afternoon, and maybe a bit into the evening. And so the morning was hospital and visiting patients at home. Yeah.
What was it like growing up in Dundas, especially with I guess a father who seemed to be kind of like an important part of the town?
Oh yes. Well, it was very simple, maybe, but and we lived right in the center of town, so there was. And it wasn't a busy town, but we were right on King Street and across from Memorial Square, so there was a lot of regular traffic and buses going from Hamilton to Galton, Kitchener, Canada Coach. Then so there was, in all of the commercial center, all the stores and everything were around us. We lived between Bank of Commerce on one side and the Melbourne Hotel on the other, and there was another hotel right next to it, hardware stores and banks and bakeries and so on across the street. The fire department was across the street, so all the time watched the fire trucks going out somewhere. There was a blacksmith shop on Memorial Square that was always interesting to go in and watch the blacksmith working and that kind of thing. Yes, so pool hall up the street, our butcher at Newitt's Butcher and Pinder's Variety, the post office up there. So we were in the center of the town and walked to everywhere, walked every day to the high school, to elementary school, and back for lunch, up to the high school, back for lunch, all the time walking. And meeting friends along the way and going up there. So we do quite a bit of the downtown activities, and so I remember quite a few. That was just part of living downtown and watching parades or whatever else was going on. Yeah.
Can you describe Pinders as you remember it, or a story, or just?
Well, I guess it was. Well, it was next to the pool hall, so I always go there, and I suppose I don't know that it's like the current day dollar stores and so on, but it's something like that, and then Five and Dimes and Kresge's, or small town Kresge's or Woolworths, so all kinds of, a little bit of everything, walking around the old counters and so on, and people that were selling, they would know you, recognize us, and so on. So it was easy to go up for whatever it was we were missing. Yes, yeah.
What was school like for you?
Well, I generally liked it. It was like I said, it was never particularly difficult or unpleasant that I can remember. Always small classes. The town was about 5,000 when I was growing up, or at least the beginning. The high school, if I recall, had about 250 students in the whole school when we started, and I think around 500 5 years later when we were graduating. If I recall, the graduating class was 13 of us maybe, and it was a good number of us had been together from kindergarten. So it was a simple walk to school, and just about there was no such thing as a school bus or anything. There were, not in elementary school, but in high school, friends were coming from Flamborough and Copetown and Linden and so on, so I suppose they were perhaps coming by bus, but it wasn't the enormous amount of school bus traffic that there is now. But the town schools, high school, served the surrounding small towns, agricultural centers out in Copetown, Linden, Flamborough, Millgrove, and those kinds of places. So we met in a way a new set of people of friends when we went to high school. But the elementary school, most of us were together, or at least a good number from kindergarten to grade 8, and others. There were at the time, during the war, there were several we remember coming from, immigrating from England or somewhere, England quite often, and so we went the rest of the way through school with new friends that were a bit new to us from their origins. Interesting.
What was Dundas like during the war? Do you remember kind of like just the differences you noticed from like before the war?
Oh, I don't remember much before. I don't really remember before the war, although I was only 2 when the war started, so I do remember these things like recycling metal and the blackouts, war sirens, air raid sirens, or tests anyhow, but and something about, I suppose there were some people we knew that went to war, sir. But at that age, it wasn't something you spent a lot of time thinking about or knowing. It just was going on.
type of organizations were you involved in school? Did you like join any extracurriculars or?
Oh, elementary school, I don't remember anything specific there. There were church choirs, but in elementary school I don't remember anything particular. In high school I played football, basketball, on football and basketball teams. That small involvement in some of the musicals or plays, but never a major player in those. But in many cases, we all got dragged into this. Some swimming, I suppose, although there was no swimming pool or anything at the school. But those kinds of things would do. Yeah.
Did you go swimming in any of the creeks around? Was that a popular?
No, I don't remember that we did that. My parents had a cottage in Halliburton, and we would be up there for a couple of months every summer, most summers. Or my parents liked to take us around. Well, we traveled with them, the east and west coasts several times. So I suppose we went to municipal pool in Hamilton sometimes, but the most of the swimming was at the lake near Halliburton. Yeah, but so not so much. I don't recall too much locally. No.
So I guess you spent less summers here then, because if you were out.
That's right. Yeah, the summers weren't here for most summers. We were at the cottage or traveling. Yeah.
Do you have a significant memory from going to high school? Like first time you went, or just something that happened that really kind of stuck with you?
Well, there probably were several, but one would be we lived across from the fire hall, and I often like to go over and look at the trucks or talk to the chief. And one year, and I can't say exactly when it was, but I think I was in high school by then. Must have been. The annex at the public school caught fire, and I had walked over to see this fire. It wasn't too far from home, so they were working at that, and they wanted some water on the building, so I was asked if I would hold a hose. Just water on the wall, don't break the window. So that was it. So I held this hose, and then they paid me $15 for my little piece of work. Well, every kid can imagine being a fireman at some time, or at least, every boy, many of them do think that. So that was one thing I remember. Yes.
Would that almost technically be your first job, or did you already have a job before?
No, that would probably be the first earned income. Yeah. Yes.
What was your first job after that?
First job after that. Well, I didn't work. I don't remember working in high school years. No, I don't think I did. But then, but in university, I would take summer jobs. But in high school, no, we mostly traveled or went to the cottage for the summers, and if I did it, small something that I didn't register very strongly.
Do you have a favorite place in Dundas?
Well, the driving park, you know, we would go up there for picnics and so on. Favorite, I don't know, but then, the Spencer Creek, the fall, you know, the water running through, that was always interesting to watch. Walking, past Bertram's machinery, you know, some of those places that made noises or looked interesting. We would do interesting things were right next door, the hotels and you know, commercial things. There was always something going on there to sort of watch or listen to or meet, or having things happening out on. So we were in the center of many different things that were fairly occurred and not terribly unusual, but always there. Yeah. And driving up the Sidna Mountain and looking over, you know, the escarpment was always interesting in terms of seeing things and just being there. The old Canada crushed stone, always you could hear the quarry crushing stone way up on the top of the mountain. And I liked, my father would take me on some of his visits to patients out in the country, so that was liked, those drives to farms or through some of the valleys on the way to Ancaster or somewhere out there so go with him.
Do you remember any specific ones, like any specific drive or visit that really sticks with you, I guess?
I don't remember the name, but there were some farms that we'd go in and they might get some squash or something, you know, to see these things growing or talking with I don't have a specific one for, no, yeah.
So I guess, do you mainly just end up visiting Dundas kind of during reunions, or how often do you come back here?
Now I have no family here, so there'll be but we do come down from Thunder Bay once or twice a year for something, but not always to Dundas. I have family that are Eastern Ontario, so we're not here. Once my father and stepmother, well, my mother died earlier, and my father and my stepmother, when they were here, we would come. But when my stepmother died, that was the last of a family draw. So we were going to Eastern Ontario more. But okay, yes. And the previous reunions weren't held in Dundas, although certainly back here once in a while for looking at things or just liking the drives. They always look different when you're an adult than when you're a child, and things change, although the downtown part of Dundas still looks very familiar in many ways. So I do come back, but occasionally.
Are there any major differences you see that kind of stick out to you, or?
Well, the major differences are perhaps because of the settled in the valley here, the big expansions up Governor's Road or other places like that, or towards Hamilton, are less apparent when you're in the old part here, and these streets, Melville and Park and even King Street to some good extent still have buildings that are quite familiar. They may or may not have changed their thing, but the post office is still there, not as a post office, I think. But anyways, it's there. Picconi's, up to a little while ago, Deluxe Restaurant, and so there's a lot. There's no Snetzinger's Lumber Company and so on. I mean, you see changes, but a lot of the buildings are still here in a different usage. And the arena, well, I remember quite a bit of time at the arena. It was built when we were growing up, and so I haven't been back to the arena, but we were rink rats, some of us at the time, so quite a bit of interest around the arena, scraping the ice, setting up wrestling rings. They weren't rings, they were squares, but called ring. Bingo nights and so on. So I was a regular rink rat. That was it. Yeah. So when we talk about work, yes, I did do that. Now that I sort of think back a bit more, yes, that I and some friends were regular rink rats and doing all the different chores, particularly with scraping ice and hockey and setting up bingo tables and wrestling rings and dances or roller skating, so on. So all that. Yeah, so when I think about it, that was regular work and for part of high school, but that was during the winter mostly.
Do you know how you got involved in it?
No, I don't. I don't remember exactly how that happened and whether it was friends doing it or whether the manager knew teenage boys around that, or whether one of us got started and others can. No, I don't remember specifically, but I was meeting some friends here at the reunion that had also been rink rats, so we traded a few stories. Yeah, so that's I'd forgotten about that as probably the one job that I was doing, at least occasionally. It was on and off, and at different times for different activities that were going on at the arena. And the arena was new at the time, so it was quite, and not too far from home, so it was a good little walk over there. We walked everywhere, although I had bicycle. We bicycled too, but walked a lot.
Did you bicycle anywhere far ever?
No, I don't. No, nothing very far. Just sort of commuting or up to the driving park or something like that. Yes.
Is there like a major local news event you can recall? That like just kind of the first one you heard, or just anyone that?
Well, at the end of the war, certainly, if I have specific recollections, well, parades, there were quite a few celebrations in Rome Memorial Square or so on, without a specific single one, but there were at the end of the war. So that was 45, so I'd have been 7, I guess I was, 7 or 8. So it's still, fairly early in one's memory. So there was that, certainly. There were a number of parades up and down. I can't think of something dramatically notable right now. No, that, but certainly activity around the end of the war.
So once you moved away from town, did you note, were there any big differences, or 'cause I guess you went to was it a smaller town that you moved
No, I moved first of all to Toronto.
Okay.
So I was back regularly with family until I moved to northwestern Ontario in 1966. So I was less often here, but often enough to come back. But that was northwestern Ontario. Took me well away from here for regular visits, but I still got back often enough.
So when you were in Toronto, was that like a huge change for you?
Oh yes, sure. Oh yes, sure it was. Yes. We'd been to Toronto often enough. When you're thinking of changes or differences, that's one I'm well aware of. My father had a sister in North Toronto, and we would visit them often enough. He also had a brother there, and we'd visit those often enough. Well, traveling to Toronto in those days, you're quickly out on number 5 highway, and going through rural, agriculture area all the way, small little places along the way, but quite a rural drive. And then there was no not even a Queen Elizabeth Way at one time, although that came along soon. But we'd go number 5 highway quite often. There was no 401 or any of those, and there was nothing fancy going through Toronto, so we wind our way up to North Toronto. It was a very, a real drive to get to North Toronto, and so it's, so a day's visit with family or his brother and sister. Now I know people commute to work from Dundas, and they never see a piece of countryside all the way, or practically not. They speed along. The idea of commuting to work from Dundas to Toronto and even further away, Ancaster or other places, commuting is, I just really shake my hand. It just seems so different, but it's the same on the others, the same all around these little towns that we used to go through, Uxbridge and Stouffville and Sunderland and whatever else are now just outliers, with people regularly taking trains or driving, and of course the trauma of driving on 401. When I was in Toronto from 59 to 66, so it was just a modest-sized city, and nothing to us getting driving around the city and so on was, but it was still bigger than I eventually liked. I want something smaller and more remote. But this business, the infilling of all these agriculture areas along number 5 and the Queen Elizabeth and 403 and 401, those, and flying into Toronto and just seeing it, there's certainly noticeable, in difference between the recollections of driving to Toronto or north of Toronto or driving to Halliburton before 401 and major highways. Those are good memories in what you had to do in those days, and the difference in tires that regularly expected them to be flat. How to change tires, and something that you go years and years, perhaps a whole history of a whole car without ever having a flat tire, you know, so things like that. Yeah. Even my first car still had a hand crank on it. Didn't have to use it very much, but earlier ones are with, you know, what my father told me about on his time on the farm and so on. It certainly changes, you know. Yes. Yes.
When did you get your first car?
Oh, it would be in '59 when I started working in Toronto. It was a Peugeot.
No clue what that is.
Big name at the time. French car. Yeah, so many weekend drives to the cottage. I always liked going to the cottage and as often as I could. Yeah.
Do you know why your dad moved to Dundas? Because you said he grew up on the mountain.
Yeah, well, yes. The farm he grew up on now is part of Hamilton Airport. It's on that up there in Glanford Township. And he, for reasons I don't remember him describing, wanted to be a doctor. And so went to McGill for that. And then, perhaps because his family, whatever, he's still attached to Dundas or wanted to. And so he bought, when Dr. Laughlin's practice, I think he maybe filled in for the doctor when he was, but anyways, he bought Dr. Laughlin's practice, which included the house and the office and patients and whatever went on. But so he, oh, I know also, yes, his father had the farm up in Glanford Township, but then he became the manager of the House of Refuge, I think it was, up on South Street, I believe. So he became a seniors, the county home, I guess they called it, for seniors and maybe low-income people or whatever. So there was a big farm at that. So that House of Refuge had a large farm. So that was part of being a manager of a seniors residence or whatever you might call it at the time. They had a big farm attached to it, so they grew their own things. And my dad talks more about that part. I think they moved there when he was relatively young. So a lot of his farm days were at the House of Refuge. So he was living in Dundas by then. And so I think for perhaps understandable reasons, I don't remember him enunciating exactly. He was drawn back, to Dundas, and the practice, Dr. Laughlin's practice, became available, and so he started with that there, and stayed there in downtown Dundas for most of his life. Yeah, and so my mother, came with him.
So we're nearing the end here.
That's all right, yes. Maybe we're just getting started, who knows?
What words of advice would you pass on to future generations?
Oh, I don't give advice very easily. But what would I think? Well, I think you live in the present. mostly, and handle yourself fairly well in the present, and just be ready for what the future, or keep yourself able to, with a good foundation for whatever the future holds, which most of us don't know what's going to happen, and do things like be prepared to move and get experience. So not to sit still, not to feel you can't move from what you're familiar with. You don't know what's going to happen, and sometimes the most interesting things happen when you take a chance or do something that you're just not sure what's going to happen. Some of the most interesting things happen then. Just prepare yourself solidly in the present and take the future as it comes and take chances.
That's good advice. Is there anything else you would like to add? Any memories? Or
Well, I always have good memories. At least I don't remember, I don't end up with bad memories. Undoubtedly things happened that were not pleasant, or which I just as soon forget, and I probably have forgotten them, so, but it was a very fine place. I always look upon it as fortunate to have had the parents I had, and living in Dundas at that time was just a fine place to be. So I always have good. I like coming back. It's interesting to it looks different when you're older, and the mountain doesn't look quite as high, but anyways, it's good, and as you can see from those of us who are here this time, that quite a few of us made friends that we are quite happy to sort of meet again once in a while. So our reunions, for a smaller group, but we've been getting together for decades, every once in a while, and recently every 2 years, a small group of us that were graduated together or spent quite a few years in Dundas schools. So it's always a pleasant to come back and revisit Webster's Falls, and so that was something my mother tells me. I don't remember this, but my mother tells me they were up at Webster's Falls for a picnic or something, and there's a fence along the edge of the escarpment there in the falls. So I managed to get outside the fence. So they tell me about it. They're a little bit of concern as I was outside the fence on the lip of this escarpment. But anyways, so Webster's Falls and all those places that are interesting and still notable little places to go to and enjoy, and specific features. So anyways, it was a good place to interesting, and my parents took us many places, so it was a place to work from, but I always like coming back. Good memories, yes, and school friends that we still like to meet and get together, and it was good.
Do you guys think you get together because it was so small? So you had
Oh yes, I think that, but it's more than that, because it was just as small for years near us. My sisters, their classes don't get together. It's more than that. But there has to be a dynamo, and Claire particularly is a dynamo. Somebody that the Helen and Kate and Jill here that have just made a little mission out of being able to see friends every once in a while, and having some attachment here that just sticks. But it's 2 or 3 of them that just have for some reason decided, and Claire I think in particular, that because he's still here, that it's just important, or want to do that. But so similar classes, similar sizes, they're not, as far as we know, they're not doing that. So there's more than just the size. is there some little something happens, then one or two people, and there's enough of us that enjoyed. Maybe had a group that just liked being together or got along well and stuck. But a couple of dynamos in the center are needed, and yeah.